Joining me now is CTV News political commentator and former director of communications for Prime Minister Paul Martin, Scott Reid. Scott, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Renee.
Okay, so a reduction of these sectoral tariffs make or break politically for the Prime Minister. Do you agree?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that it's an encouraging sign. I think there's lots of things that can make or break this. So is forestry, softwood lumber, which has never been a resolved issue in Canada-U.S. trade, is it linked in any way to this? What about auto? What else might be gained? What is the process going forward? What are the concessions precisely that have been offered up? Is there a bunch of commitments to access to critical minerals or energy? So there are a lot of important questions that would completely alter the complexion of how this plays with the public. And all of those things, or many of those things individually, could make or break this deal. So it's an encouraging sign. The fact that the Prime Minister wanted to link those other tariffs into this conversation, and it appears as though he's had some success, that's a positive. But what else is in there? And it's very hard for us to evaluate or pronounce upon it until we see the whole deal.
Now, the U.S. has already kind of indicated, according to sources, that the softwood lumber tariffs are not a part of this conversation. And here's where things get interesting, because if there is an agreement for premiers to restore American booze back to shelves, is every premier going to be on board if they don't see some kind of relief for their province? I'm thinking specifically of David Eby and these lumber tariffs.
You're exactly right. So this is one of the clear objectives the Americans have had in this last round, say in this last 2-3 weeks, and that has been to divide us regionally, sectorally, politically, in a way that they weren't successful in doing earlier. So to your point, softwood lumber. When I was in the Prime Minister's office in the early 2000s, we had a flourishing free trade agreement. It was a matter of absolute established political consensus on both sides of the border. Softwood lumber was still a sticking point. So it was always unlikely it would be part of this deal. But how much is Eby going to be willing to make a concession to put booze back on the shelves if it's not addressed? Will he take it on faith that it might be addressed going forward? That's very difficult for him politically. And look, the Prime Minister's briefing his cabinet now. He's going to brief the premiers soon, and they're going to be able to do the math on their hands. Who's a winner? Who's a loser? What comes next? And it's going to be a real political challenge for the Prime Minister before he even gets to the microphones and talks to the public to persuade premiers that Canada strong means Canada's got to stick together, even if everybody didn't get what they were looking for. That's going to be a tough discussion.
How tough of a test is that going to be for Carney to get all premiers on board, if not all of the premiers get what they want out of this deal?
It's an extraordinarily difficult test. Imagine it. Think about it politically. Let's just pick, we've already talked about British Columbia. Let's go to Quebec. Premier Frechette is fighting for her political life. An election's going to be called probably within days, and she's behind in the polls and looks like she's done for. Do you think she's going to be in a mood to make soft sounds and to fall in line if there are advances on supply management? Now, Dominic LeBlanc today said we're not changing the structure of supply management, but there's a lot of ambiguity when it comes to how it's interpreted, what that means in terms of trade disputes, what access could be. Will they still continue to sell only to manufacturers here, or might we see it directly retailed, American milk and dairy products? This is the kind of thing that will be very hard for any Quebec premier to swallow. Christine Frechette is not just any premier. She is one who's about to face an election. You can bet she's going to make it tough. So it's a huge political obstacle for the Prime Minister to bring everybody together and keep them together in the face of Trump's hostilities.
Now, I really, really want to get your read on Trump floating the idea of resurrecting the Keystone XL pipeline abandoned in 2021. Where do you think that came from, and do you think that that could be part of the deal?
I do think it could be part of the deal, and I'd like to know more about it. As with all of this, we're speculating like mad. But it doesn't surprise me that much. It had been rumored for a period of time a few months ago that maybe there were discussions about renewing Keystone. And the reason is that it provides Americans with some assurances in terms of access to Canadian oil and energy. That's a positive. So if you can use that, pun intended, to oil the skids, maybe that makes sense for the Prime Minister. It does, however, also push back and contradict the stated objective of the federal government, which is to diversify our reliance on the United States, get our oil to other markets, Asia, and so forth. So it's interesting. There are going to be compromises all over the place. I don't think this is one that's going to freak out the Canadian public, to be honest. I just think it's one that rubs up against some of the stated objectives the government has had from a broader policy perspective.
Very interesting there. We will unfortunately have to leave it there for today. Scott, thank you very much for this, as always.
Thank you.
That's CTV News political commentator and former director of communications for Prime Minister Paul Martin, Scott Reid.